Duskmourn House of Horror.
Yeah, it's here.
It's here.
So we did a short video in which I, at least, complained about some of the mechanics previously. And I hate to, keep harping on that, but at the same time I do not, and I am going to do exactly that.
And now that we've played with the mechanics...
Yes, we've done pre-release.
We have more opinions.
We're going to apply a grading scale to the mechanics flavor-wise, only flavor-wise, not mechanically. There are better people for that. But we are going to steal their grading scales and go A through F. Probably not with the minuses and pluses, but maybe.
I don't think we need to get that specific, but who knows? Maybe we will.
Yeah, but so just to calibrate our scale here, I was thinking flying is probably the quintessential A mechanic. It just absolutely makes sense. As soon as people learn any rules of the game, flying does what it sounds like it would do.
Yeah, I contributed Death Touch. I think that's another one that's very easy to understand, and it does pretty much exactly what it sounds like.
Yeah. Then for Bs, we have Hexproof. You got to know a little bit more about the rules of the game, but it's pretty close to what you would guess. It's not as incredibly trivial to understand as flying is, but someone tries to do something bad to your creature, they can't do it.
Yeah, that one's easy to understand. I think when you're first learning, it can be a little bit difficult to wrap your head around the difference between targeting creatures and things that affect all creatures. But that's where we get into stuff like... Well, similar note, for C, we selected Shroud, which is a very similar mechanic. It just takes it one step further. However, now the naming is becoming a little bit less intuitive as far as what this does.
Like, once it's explained to you, you get what it means. That, okay, if something's shrouded, no one can target it with anything. All right.
At this point, we're getting into things where if it didn't have reminder text printed on the card... Like, how would you understand this
once
mechanic?
It's explained to you, it makes sense. But if I just tell you, hey, there's a new mechanic and it's called Shroud, you're probably not going to be... Your first guess might not be right.
If you told me about that, like if I had no idea, and you said, hey, there's a new mechanic in this next set, it's called Shroud, I would honestly think it's something closer to maybe Manifest, or like something where there's hidden knowledge.
I would guess maybe unblockability.
Yeah, or like something where we're not going to know everything about the creature, like it's sort of hidden, but that's not exactly what it does at all.
And then at D, which is actually topical and sort of the first thing we're covering here, because returning mechanic, Delirium.
Yes.
Now, I know people love Delirium. I love Delirium.
Yeah.
But in terms of the word explaining what it means in the game, there is not much connection. Like, what do you think is the intended interpretation there? I mean, it came out in Eldritch Moon in first place, right? And that the theme is insanity. So I get why they would want the word
I think
Delirium
this, like, to me, what makes the most sense is... It's often tied in sets where we have mill mechanics, and so when we have things that are directly like stealing thoughts out of your library is kind of a metaphor for your mind in a lot of spell cards. There's cards like Mind Twist and things that reference that. So I feel like it's that, like you're having something directly like pulled out of your brain. But for me, when I think about it, okay, having X number of cards or different types in the graveyard equals Delirium is not as intuitive. A word for that state?
Yeah, it's a stretch. It kind of sets the tone for the set, but it's barely hanging on there. And then at F...
Cipher.
I can hardly ever remember what this does anyway. It's just...
Yeah, it's like as you cast a spell, you can cipher it onto a creature, and then like when that creature attacks, or I can't remember if it attacks or does combat damage, you get to do the spell again.
Yeah, what is the connection there? That makes no sense. Like, cipher, to me, a cipher is like a form of a writing.
That's,
like it's
I think of it like a code or like cryptography related. If we look up the definition, there's probably... Like, this is not something that I think... Maybe it's a really niche use of this, but it's not something that I think makes good sense for what this mechanic does.
Right. And game design, I think you should be able to expect that the bar is flying. The thing, the name of the mechanic should have a meaning that makes it easier to understand.
Yeah, especially when it's a new mechanic and you have new players who are trying to wrap their heads around it, and then even more experienced players are like, let's see, how do I explain this? That's not a hallmark of a great mechanic name, but that's what we're here to talk about.
All right, well, let's get into Duskmourn itself then. Let's start with Manifest Dread.
Yeah, so this plays back on a mechanic we already had, Manifest.
Yeah.
So there is that existing callback for players who are at least that familiar with the game. What this does is, how do they word it? You manifest a card, and you put the other, there's like a number, right?
Yeah,
you manifest.
you look at 2 cards. Yeah. One of them goes in the graveyard, and one of them is manifested. So it's 2/2.
Yeah, so you get to decide. And then it goes onto the battlefield face down.
Yeah. And you know what? I was thinking this was actually pretty accessible, but it's only because we already know Manifest.
Yeah, so if we didn't know Manifest, like if this was the first set we ever played, I feel like I would have a little bit of difficulty with this.
Like just the word Manifest by itself, to me, not knowing what the mechanic is, that means you have an idea and it becomes tangible.
Yes,
right?
That's how I think of it.
And that doesn't really make sense with a bunch of ambushy, sneaky critters that are just camouflaged. Like sneak or camouflage are.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's actually very literal in that you're manifesting dread for your opponent by putting this hidden thing onto the battlefield, and they don't know what it is.
Yeah.
But beyond,
I think in this set the combination of Manifest and Dread works a little bit better because it does. It adds mystery to, in the sense of, oh no, what's under that?
Yeah. Because we encountered that in a game where we were like, well, what's that thing? How worried about that are we? Maybe it's nothing, maybe it's not.
And at the same time, a lot of decks care about Delirium, and so they're also putting something into the graveyard, and if it's a type they didn't have, that's...
Yeah, maybe we're more worried about that.
Yeah, so this... I think Manifest Dread here is actually doing considerably better work than just Manifest did by itself.
Yeah.
But I'm still thinking it's like a C.
Yeah, I was going to say this is a C for me, just because it's not immediately apparent what this does. It's a little clunky, so if I was new and didn't understand...
But we can conceive of an explanation of, okay, that's how that word would mean that.
And I think the flavor of these words works okay for what it does. Yeah. I'm not bothered by that.
Okay.
Maybe there's a better term for this, but I'm not bothered by this one. I think this is a C.
C. All right. Next is Survival. Okay. Creatures, I think they all have the survivor creature type, but the key element here is that if your creature is tapped after combat, you get some kind of effect. And that makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah, I think that works. I like that they have to tap, because that does tie into surviving is not just about existing. So you're not just standing there. You have to actually do something.
And there's lots of cards that actually get around just putting it in combat.
Right.
But the default meaning in Magic is that if it's tapped, well, was it in combat?
And that's probably the easiest way to tap things, unless you have some other strategy going on that you're using creatures to produce mana, or you're using them for like your recurring vehicles.
There's like one vehicle at rare.
Yeah.
There's the baseball bat, which... Oh, no, it doesn't tap things itself. It taps your other things, which just helps you survive in the combat sense. And then there's that uncommon direct damage spell that taps to your things to damage something else.
They have to do, like, they have to participate in some kind of game action to reach a tapped state.
Yeah.
Which I like that.
Yeah, I think this is pretty good.
Yeah, I think I would give this, I don't know if it's quite A grade, but I think B. Like a real solid B.
I think so too. Yeah, this is very accessible. Eerie, however. Okay, so I want to reference Mark Rosewater's Drive to Work podcast because I understand how they got here.
Yes.
I'm not happy about where they arrived. But, you know what? What are your thoughts on as it stands? Then we'll reverse engineer.
So what this does, it's a triggered ability that triggers when an enchantment enters and whenever you fully unlock a room, which we'll get to rooms later.
Yep.
I just don't like... Eerie to me is strictly... It's a descriptive adjective of a feeling.
Yeah.
It doesn't evoke an action happening. There's nothing particularly eerie for me about enchantments entering.
Yeah.
I mean, depending on what they do, that could have an effect. But I don't feel a strong flavor tie with this one. It feels... I don't know. It's not evocative for me.
Maybe Eerie would have been fine for Manifest Dread.
Maybe that would have been okay. But when I read what this does, I'm like, okay, sure.
Yeah, like when the Glimmer enters, it feels eerie.
Which, probably not, because all the Glimmers are, the cutesy little animals.
So...
I don't know, this one doesn't feel... I don't feel strong, oh, yeah, that makes sense, or, it doesn't trigger anything for me.
No, I don't think it explains it at all.
It doesn't... the word eerie does not help me understand what this does.
Yeah, I think this is around an F, maybe D.
Yeah, I would say F. I'm not afraid to give harsh grades.
I'm kind of wanting to give it some tiny credit for doing the same thing Delirium did, just fitting in the set. And I think that's what they're doing here. They're just like, well, we want a spooky word because it's a spooky set. So, eerie it is. But it just doesn't make sense attached to this thing. So,
yeah, I don't have a problem with the word. I have a problem with it as...
You know what? I'll join you to F. It just does not make sense.
Mechanic.
No, totally. Absolutely. 100%.
And it doesn't help me understand what this mechanic does.
Right. But back at vision and design, it did, because the original mechanic, as mentioned, it was on Rosewater's podcast, was called Afraid, and it triggered, I think, when enchantments entered, but also when nightmare or horror creatures entered.
And see, that makes a little more sense for me. I'm like okay,
the enchantments were a little bit tacked on, but the horror and nightmare creatures, Afraid, a nightmare or a horror shows up, that makes absolute sense that triggers things.
For most people, you would feel afraid.
But,
there are,
and I'm sure they're just basically mechanical balance reasons that made them iterate through it and arrive at this other combination of things to cause the trigger. But if you're going to make that modification, it doesn't mean Afraid anymore, and it doesn't mean a synonym of Afraid anymore.
We can call it something else. And I think that's what I feel from this most strongly, is that this feels like a place where we had to tape some things together to make the mechanics work, which is fine. I understand that's a part of designing a game, especially one as complex as Magic. But we didn't have to commit to the name. Maybe we could have come up with something else for this.
Yeah, that would have been my hope.
Yeah.
All right, I'm with you. F. Oh, okay. Impending.
Impending. So this is kind of like Foreshadow or Foretell a little bit. Was Foreshadow? I'm thinking Foretell, and there's another one, Suspend.
Suspend, yeah.
So it's kind of like Suspend. Yeah. It's actually more like Suspend than Foretell. But basically, you can cast a card, like for instance, the Overlord of the Hauntwoods, for a cheaper cost with time counters on it. So it will still give you the enters effect when you cast it, but then it's not a creature until you take the last time counter off. So this one, honestly, I think is fine. Impending makes sense for how this works. We get a little taste of what's going to happen when it enters. And then it's obviously telegraphed to your opponent what's going to happen when this becomes a creature. They can see all the information about it. There's nothing hidden.
Yeah. Oh, I think it's great.
Yeah.
I think it absolutely does what it says. I guess when I hear the word impending, I think impending doom.
Yes.
That's just what you hear.
I think that's a very common use.
And so it leads you that way and kind of uses that cultural hook where we put those words together, and you have a big thing coming and you know what it is and you can see it from a mile away, but there's nothing you can do. I mean, you might have enchantment removal, but generally there's nothing you can do.
Yeah, this reminds me, so I think of the horror movie trope where you can see the monster, or, you can see Jason running at you with the knife, and even though you should be able to, or... Oftentimes it looks like, okay, they could probably outrun him at that speed, and he just keeps plodding along, so it's that impending sense of, no, he's still coming, and nothing, maybe somebody tries to, hit him with a ball bat a few times, and he just keeps going. So I like it for that. I think it's flavorful. I think I would give this... I think I'm going to give this a B. Maybe an A.
Yeah,
I think it might be A grade.
I'm on the cusp. Yeah. I mean, is it in flying territory?
I don't know if it's as good as flying, but I think it's a B. I'm going to go with B.
It's at least a B. Okay, stick with B. Great. Then I think that just takes us back to that thing that has just been sticking in my craw, even though we talked about it before.
And we've continued to talk about it.
We have.
At length.
And it's rooms.
Yeah.
I am so bothered by the fact that these cards do not depict a room. They depict 2 rooms.
Yeah. I had more thoughts about this, and I think I might have stolen a thought that you told me at one point, but I thought corridor.
Yeah, I was brainstorming for weeks, and I've been thinking that's my favorite one.
Because a corridor is a long hallway in which there are multiple rooms that you can go through off to the side. So like a hotel corridor, or a hallway, I guess, is synonymous with that.
Yeah, but the corridor has that like. That's definitely a haunted place, right?
Yeah, I mean, corridor has a vibe to it that I think hallway just doesn't.
Yeah, it's like it's an institution or it's a haunted house.
Yeah, it's a hospital or maybe it's a haunted house or something.
And those are perfect for that. Yeah, and so they could have done that. They could have called these corridors, and that would have given them flexibility to implement other things that had rooms in them in the future. Instead of just calling these doors to a room, call it rooms on a corridor.
Stand by rooms should have been something more like Enter the Dungeon. Where you have multiple areas on a token that you can occupy.
And you had said that a few weeks ago when we were discussing it, and it turns out on the previous episode of Rosewater's podcast, they talk about how Envision design it was exactly that. Yeah. They had a meeple that you would move around, they cited that it's a real popular game, the Betrayal at House on the Hill. Okay. Right. So that kind of thing where you're generating the rooms as you go. Yes. So, and actually, in Magic terms, it would be more like Plane Chase, I think.
Yeah. Like that would make sense, because I think another thing that we talked about previously that has continued to bother me is most of the time when you enter a room, there's one door in and out.
Yeah.
It's not common that you have a room that has multiple doors going in and out of it. So the idea of like entering a room and then having to unlock another door to go into a new room...
Like it that happens, but it's really unusual.
It's an odd architectural choice that feels more like a maze. If you're going between different rooms, like that feels more intentional and deliberate. That's not like a normal. And I guess, I mean, this is not a normal house, so maybe.
That's true. And older houses didn't really have hallways. Like if you go back far enough, it was common for just to be room. But. Part of what bothers me is this just doesn't seem extensible to other sets, whereas it could have been. It could have been a really generic thing.
I agree. Like there are most of the mechanics that we have in this set, I don't foresee them reusing.
Yeah.
And this doesn't seem like a place that we're going to come back to like we have with Ravnica or Innistrad. So I have a hard time imagining anything about this being reused.
And it just seems like it should have been. It seems like such a good. I mean, double-face permanence. Why not?
Because like I could see something kind of similar to this is the battles that they've recently introduced.
Yeah.
Battles could have a place in a lot of other sets. That's not something that's going to be that hard to reuse.
Yeah.
I don't see rooms or eerie necessarily coming back. Maybe Impending. That's something that I could potentially see.
I could see that. Honestly, I think I think rooms will come back because it's so far it's seeming pretty popular mechanically with the fan base.
Mechanically, I will say, like play wise, they're fine to use. It's just the naming bothers me.
But of course, that means we're going to be stuck with this forever.
Yeah,
I hate that. I hate
wish
that
it wasn't
so much.
called that.
But there was a bit more of an explanation of how they got from A to B.
Yes.
They talked about it on both episodes of that podcast, and in the latter one they mentioned that I think at some point they had just one room per card.
Okay.
And they realized if you're supposed to be exploring a haunted house, just the way a battlefield ends up, you just have like one room, and you're not in a house if it's just one room. So we wanted multiple rooms.
Okay.
Which again, fine. Just change what you're calling it.
Yeah.
Like what you ended on was awesome. This is a great mechanic. This is great, but it's a terribly named mechanic. It's so frustrating.
I will say that I'm putting together a mono blue deck right now. I've told you about this one, the Geralf deck that I'm building.
Yeah.
And there was a room card that I considered playing because it seemed appropriate, and I ultimately decided not to because I didn't want to play it.
You just hate this so much?
I just hated it enough that I was like, I don't want to look at that.
Yeah.
I don't want to deal with that when I'm trying to enjoy this game.
Yep, I get that. I don't know if I can honestly call it an F, though, because like, it's so close. It's like they just got the numbers wrong. Like, that's not the room. Those are two rooms, and you just did it singular. Why'd you do that? But I get it.
Yeah, I think I'm going to give it a D.
Yeah. A D with, like, some anger behind it.
I'm going to give it a D and, like, circle it in red.
Yeah.
Because I want them to know what they did. I just really like fish and their little faces.
Good.